Hey Wolfgang, I created this tutorial for you to show how to use the lutetium PSMA nomogram. You can access it either via the link in the email or in the discussion section of Lancet publication, or you can simply Google it, LuPSMA nomogram, and here on the UCLA website you can simply end up on the web page. A disclaimer will pop up. You can simply press continue. On the first part will be an introduction about the project and the tool itself, and very important, we have even a desktop version of the app which is available and can be downloaded here, and you install it on your personal computer. Then the risk calculator, which includes all parameters that were found to be predictive for the outcome data. Today we will have a hypothetical patient, and then I'm going to walk you through the entire process on how the predictions are generated and how the results can be interpreted. Well, let's assume our patient has been diagnosed with prostate cancer for 12 years. He did receive chemotherapy previously. The most recent labs show a hemoglobin of 12. The tumor SUV mean, so the tumor uptake in PSMA PET, which in our case was calculated, as you know, using QPSMA software for whole body tumor segmentation. However, you can use any software that has capability for tumor segmentation, and the average SUV in the whole body tumor lesions can be calculated, even if the segmentation method is slightly different. For instance, if you go from SUV of 3 as a threshold for both bones and soft tissue. Anyway, let's say our patient has a tumor SUV mean of 12. The average in the Lancet paper was about 9.5, so we are slightly higher here. The patient has more than 20 metastases, pelvic lymph node metastases, no bone metastases, and no liver. Once you are done, you simply press calculate, and then the predictions are generated. We have 3 endpoints: the overall survival, PSA progression-free survival, and PSA response. PSA response has a decline greater than 50%. These two Kaplan-Meier curves for OS and PFS were translated from the Lancet, and they were generated based on the 270 patient population, which was stratified into low versus high risk. For non-response, the low risk is in blue and the high risk is in red for both endpoints. Now, the black dots are the individual predictions on this patient based on the parameters, the values that were just given. The OS is predicted at 12 months and 18 months after treatment initiation, and the PFS is at 3 months and 6 months. This 3 months corresponds very well with the interim assessment after 2 cycles of treatment. The probabilities are visually displayed here in relation to the historical patient population, but also the numbers are displayed here on top. So for instance, in this case, we have an 80% probability of not having a PSA progression after 2 cycles of treatment. So this might be an important message for our patient. Then we have a 60% probability of achieving a PSA decline greater than 50%. What I do suggest is for all patients to go and open the PDF report. Then on the different web page, the report is generated. We'll have the same Kaplan-Meier curves, also now with the risk group, so low risk group for our patient. And then going into detail, so this PDF report gives, very detailed information on how all these predictions are calculated and how to interpret them. This is very important for us, for MEDONCs, or maybe even for the patient. So for instance, let's take previous chemotherapy. So our patient did have previous chemotherapy, and that generates 14 points for OS, 15 points for PSA PFS, and 22 for PSA decline. Then at the end, we sum up the points that are generated from each parameter, and in this case we ended up with 157, 109, and 107. When we do not have a value, it means that parameter was not used in the predictions for that specific endpoint. So then what do we do now with this endpoint, with this total number of points? Well, we go on the second page at the very end of the report, and we have the section total number of points. And for overall survival and for PFS, the endpoint would be death and PSA progression. So we do not want to achieve this endpoint, meaning a higher number of points is correlated with a higher probability of achieving the endpoint. Since we do not want to achieve it, we want to have for OS and PFS low number of points for our patient. And we also generated some cutoffs based on the Lancet patient population. And we ended up with 197 for overall survival and 178 for PFS. Meaning, if our patient has a total number of points in the OS nomogram lower than 197, he will be stratified into low risk group. If he has lower than 178 in the PFS nomogram, he will be stratified also into the low risk. Anything above these cutoffs will be in the high risk for non-response, so we don't want that. Well, in our case, he had 157, which is below 197, and 109 for PFS, which is below 178. Right, so our patient is in the low risk group. Now, moving forward to PSA response. Well, in this case, we have a positive endpoint. Right? We have a PSA response, so we want our patient to achieve this response. So we want for PSA response to have as high as possible the number of points. The cutoff was, the best cutoff was set at 41 points, so anything above, or let's say below 41 points, will classify the patient as being a likely non-responder. For PSA 50% decline, anything above this cutoff would be likely responder. So I hope this clarifies a little bit how how the patients are stratified in low versus high risk, or responders versus likely non-responders. And even more, we have a brief explanation in plain English on how the value of each parameter for this individual patient is impacting the prognosis. So let's say, for example, previous chemotherapy. Well, we know that previous treatment with chemotherapy has a negative impact on the prognosis. If here the answer would be no, we will say no previous treatment with chemotherapy has a positive impact on the prognosis. Well, I think this was everything for today. I hope you enjoyed it and it's useful. If you have any further questions, I'm very happy to help. Just let me know. And I hope I will see you soon.